Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about who won the war, and our focus is going to be on the end of the Revolutionary War and this period of the 1780s in the United States, because there's some interesting artifacts that I want to have a look at. So let's get into it. Now, this period of the 1780s that we're going to be looking at is referred to as the Confederation period, and it's just the era in United States history after the American Revolution and prior to the ratification of the United States Constitution in the late 1780s. So it's this small window of time, primarily in the 1780s. Now, I came across a really interesting book talking about the forgotten coins of North American colonies. It just tells a story of a lot of really unique and interesting coins with murky histories. And speaking of these murky histories, after the independence of the 13 colonies, some of these states had permission to mint some of their own coins, and you had some really interesting designs showing up. And this is from Connecticut from 1785 to 1788, but you had these imitations almost of the British halfpenny, and you would see a man wearing a laurel wreath and sometimes armor. The likenesses were typically of George II or George III. It's just interesting because, again, you just got your independence after the Treaty of Paris in 1783, and you're producing coins to some degree almost honoring that other king. So interesting. In 1787, Vermont, very unique coins as well. And in New York, there are these coins that go by the Latinized name for New York, Nova Iborak coins, and a likeness, I believe, of George II on this one. So just really interesting. And the coins were made to look like contemporary British and Connecticut coppers. So just, when you think about in 1783, General Washington, they entered New York City after the British finally evacuated. But this period of time after that, they're pumping out these coins that seem to almost honor that king. And I find it very interesting because when you come across this particular coin or token that was circulating in the 1780s in the United States, it also seems to point to King George III. And it's referred to as this Georgius Triumpho token from 1783, the first George Washington token. And these were struck in England, but they were found in the United States. And the Latin term is for George the Victorious. And you can see the likeness of what is King George III. And what I want to point out here is these coins, these Virginia halfpennies from 1773. So prior to the Declaration of Independence in 1776, you had these coins floating around the colonies, and there were, I believe, 120 specimens recovered from Williamsburg during archaeological digs, and these are clearly King George III coins. And just another tidbit about these Virginia halfpennies that I found interesting is, even though the colony of Virginia was granted the authority to mint coinage all the way back by decree of Royal Charter in 1609, they didn't actually exercise that authority until 164 years later in 1773. So there's like this nexus point of a lot of interesting coins in the 1770s and 1780s. But where I'm going with this, I just wanted to point out on the left you have the George the Victorious coins from 1783, after the Declaration of Independence and after the Revolutionary War. And then on the right you had those Virginia halfpennies from a decade earlier, clearly showing King George III, and it's an almost identical likeness. And just a little blurb talking about the George the Victorious coin. The imitation of the George III obverse is so close that at first glance it is not evident which George is referred to, whether it's George Washington or George the King of England. Frequently it is suggested this coin was intended to have a double meaning. So these coins are just really interesting to me, and I guess the speculation here is maybe King George III was actually the victorious one and not George Washington. But a lot of these coins are turning up in Florida as well here. This one, I believe, was from St. Augustine and there was another one I saw found in Jacksonville, Florida as well. But the history of George Washington, it's very interesting, and I believe he died, according to the official history, 1799, and then a year later you had the first biography of Washington written in 1800 by Mason Locke Weems, also known as Parson Weems. And this particular individual, Mason Locke Weems, he was apparently a clergyman for the parish church which George Washington attended before going on to become a bookseller. So just a little bit of a backstory, and when you look into some of the biography of George Washington, of course, there's the infamous cutting down of a cherry tree. And according to this article, they were just mentioning how when the biography of George Washington was first published in 1800, it didn't actually have this particular story in it. The cherry tree myth did not appear until the book's 5th edition, published in 1806. So just a little bit of a backstory. And when I look at a lot of these artifacts, these tobacco clay pipes that I've talked about, there are some of these pipes that feature the likeness of a Washington on it, but I don't think it's this particular Washington that we're being told about. Like, I think these are older. So it's not just the old world Tartarian buildings that seem to have false histories. I'm looking, okay, well, what came before that? And when I'm looking at that period that's largely buried now, the history for that period of time also seems false. So I think we've been given false histories, not only for the structures from the 1800s, but this earlier period of interaction between European powers and the native populations in North America. I think we've actually been given a rewritten version of that as well. But yeah, these presidential pipes, a lot of which can be found in central and western parts of America, at a lot of these forts and fur trading outposts. Some of them do say Washington on them, but none of them actually say president. And it's been speculated that he's wearing a crown, but I actually think this is more of a fez. And there are other tobacco clay pipes showing Native Americans wearing this type of headdress. So I think that's what we're actually seeing. And when you start looking at some of these artifacts, we're told they're from the 1850s, but I think they're older. A lot of interesting figures associated with some of these artifacts wearing these headdresses and showing up in places that seem a little out of place, actually. And found similar tobacco clay pipes with these what's referred to as Turk's heads, and these were found in Quebec, I believe, and even northern Ontario. So I think that there is this early period of America, but it's different than the version that we're given. But that's my opinion. And I just came across an article talking about how a wealthy Welshman is thought to have inspired America's name and flag, Richard America. Now again, this is just an article talking about it, but apparently the coat of arms belonging to the America family believed to be the inspiration for the American flag. So I came across it, thought I'd add it here at the end, but it's just an interesting narrative. I almost think that there was this early period, then there was a destruction, then you had the rise of these old world Tartarian buildings, and then something happened to them, and then we show up. We've been given a different history for what's happened in the past, and we're kind of recycling through it, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I think that's all I have for you today. I just want to leave it here, but I do want to give a big shout out to my channel members. Thank you for all your help and support. Greatly appreciated. And thank you to all my patrons. Really appreciate all of your contributions as well. So thank you once again. So until next time, take care. Bye.